Have you ever watched your whole world fall apart right before your eyes? I mean really crumble. Bank accounts frozen, friends gone, standing alone in a courtroom with nothing but the clothes on your back. That's where Joy found herself. Her husband Victor thought he had already won. He thought cutting her off from everything would make her disappear quietly. He even stood up in court and told the judge she was too foolish to hire a lawyer.
Driven by nothing more than spite and desperation. She lacks the credibility and integrity to stand against someone of my stature.
But Victor made one critical mistake. He forgot to ask Joy about her mother. And when those courtroom doors flew open, the look on Victor's face, let me tell you, it wasn't just shock, it was pure terror. You're about to hear the most savage courtroom destruction in Nigerian history. This is a story about betrayal, about a man who thought money made him untouchable, and about a mother's fury that no amount of wealth could escape. Before we jump in, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button for Folktale by Eli. We bring you real stories about real people, the kind that make you think twice about how you treat others. And if you enjoy this story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always love hearing from you guys. All right, let's begin. The air inside courtroom 12 of the Port Harcourt High Court was thick and heavy. The ceiling fans were spinning slowly overhead, barely moving the humid air that smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish. It was the smell of endings, of marriages dissolving, of lives being split apart on paper. But for Victor Okafor, the air smelled like victory. Victor sat in his chair at the plaintiff's table, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive imported suit. The fabric was smooth, probably cost more than most people in Port Harcourt made in 3 months. He checked his wristwatch, a gold Rolex that caught the light streaming through the high windows, and let out a sharp breath through his nose. Impatient, confident. "She's late," Victor whispered to the man sitting beside him. "Or maybe she's finally realized there's no point in showing up." The man next to Victor was Emeka Nwosu. If you knew anything about divorce law in Rivers State, you knew that name. Emeka wasn't just a lawyer, he was a destroyer. Senior partner at Nwosu, Peters and Associates, he had built his reputation by crushing opposition in divorce cases. People called him the Hammer because once he started hitting, he didn't stop until everything was broken. Emeka straightened his burgundy tie, his eyes scanning the court documents in front of him with the look of a man who had already won. "It doesn't matter if she shows up, Victor," Emeka said quietly, his voice smooth like oil. "We filed the emergency order to freeze all the joint accounts on Monday. She has no access to cash. No money means no lawyer. And no lawyer facing me means she walks out of here with whatever crumbs we decide to give her." Victor smiled, turning to look across the aisle. Sitting there, completely alone, was Joy. She looked so small. Smaller than Victor remembered anyway. She wore a simple grey dress. The kind you could buy at Balogun Market for a few thousand naira. Nothing fancy. Her hands were folded on the wooden table in front of her, fingers locked together so tight her knuckles had turned pale. There were no files in front of her, no legal assistants whispering advice, no glass of water, just Joy, staring straight ahead at the empty judge's chair, her face expressionless. "Look at her," Victor said, loud enough that the handful of people sitting in the public gallery could hear. His voice carried across the quiet courtroom. "Pathetic. I almost feel sorry for her. It's like watching a goat tied up at the abattoir. She knows what's coming, but there's nothing she can do about it." "Focus, Victor," Emeka warned, though a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Justice Okoro doesn't like noise in his courtroom. Let's finish this quickly. I have a meeting with the governor's legal team at 2 o'clock. "Don't worry, Emeka," Victor said, leaning back in his chair. "By 2 o'clock I'll be a free man. And she'll be packing her things into one of those yellow Danfo buses, heading back to wherever she came from." The courtroom door opened, and a heavy-set man in a black uniform walked in. Officer Chukwu. He had been a bailiff in Port Harcourt courts for 15 years and had seen enough divorces to make him stop believing in love altogether. His voice boomed across the room. "All rise, the Honourable Justice Benjamin Okoro presiding." Everyone stood up. The rustle of clothing and shuffling of feet echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Justice Okoro walked in, his black robe flowing behind him. He was a thin man with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He had a reputation for running his courtroom with military precision. No delays, no excuses, no nonsense. He took his seat at the elevated bench, adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the papers in front of him. "Be seated," Justice Okoro said. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded instant obedience. Everyone sat. He opened the file. Case number HCPH 2024-1847, Okafor versus Okafor. This is a preliminary hearing for the dissolution of marriage and the matter of asset division and spousal maintenance. Justice Okoro looked up at the plaintiff's table. "Barrister Nwosu, good to see you." "Thank you, my lord," Emeka said, standing smoothly. "We are ready to proceed." Justice Okoro turned his gaze to the defense table. His eyes narrowed slightly. Joy stood up slowly, her legs shaking just a little. "Mrs. Okafor," Justice Okoro said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I see you are here without counsel. Are you expecting representation?" Joy cleared her throat. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the size of the courtroom. "Yes, my lord. She should be here very soon." Victor let out a loud snort. He didn't even bother to cover his mouth. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. Justice Okoro's head snapped toward Victor. "Is something funny, Mr. Okafor?" Emeka Nwosu immediately stood up, placing a firm hand on Victor's shoulder. "Apologies, my lord. My client is simply frustrated. This matter has dragged on for months, and the emotional strain is considerable." "Control your client, Barrister Nwosu," Justice Okoro warned, his tone cold. "This is a court of law, not a beer parlor." He turned back to Joy. "Mrs. Okafor, this hearing was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock. It is now 5 minutes past. The court's time is valuable. If your attorney is not present within the next few minutes, I will have to assume you are proceeding without representation." "She is coming, my lord," Joy said, her voice gaining just a tiny bit of strength. "There was traffic on Abba Road." "Traffic," Victor muttered, leaning forward so his voice would carry. "Or maybe your lawyer realized you can't pay her. Oh wait, you can't pay anyone. I froze the accounts this morning, remember?" "Mr. Okafor." Justice Okoro slammed his gavel on the wooden block. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. "One more word from you, and you will spend the rest of this hearing in a holding cell. Do you understand me?" "Yes, my lord," Victor said, standing up quickly and buttoning his jacket. He put on a look of fake humility, but his eyes were still mocking. "I apologize. I simply want what's fair. My wife is confused. She doesn't understand how the law works. She has no income, no skills, nothing. I offered her a generous settlement last week, 2 million naira and the 2015 Toyota Camry. She refused." Victor turned and looked directly at Joy. His eyes were cold, dead. "I tried to help you, Joy. I really did. But you wanted to play games. Now look where you are, sitting there with nobody. You don't have a lawyer because no lawyer wants to work for free." "Barrister Nwosu," Justice Okoro said sharply, "control your client or I will hold him in contempt." "My lord," Emeka said smoothly, standing and buttoning his own jacket. "While my client's passion is regrettable, his point has merit. We are wasting the court's valuable time. Mrs. Okafor has clearly not secured representation. Under the rules of this court and established precedent, we respectfully move to proceed immediately with a judgment based on the evidence already filed. She has had months to prepare." Justice Okoro looked at Joy. He looked tired, like he had heard this same story 100 times before. "Mrs. Okafor," he said slowly, "Barrister Nwosu is correct on a technical point. The court cannot wait indefinitely. If you cannot produce legal counsel right now, I must assume you are representing yourself. And I must tell you, given the complex financial matters involved in this case, that would be extremely unwise. Do you understand?" "I am not representing myself, my lord," Joy said. Her eyes were still fixed on the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. "Please, just 2 more minutes." "She's lying," Victor hissed. "She has nobody. Her father was a mechanic who died years ago. Her mother abandoned her. She has no family, no connections. Who is she going to call? A miracle worker?" Victor laughed again. It was a cruel sound. Harsh, he felt powerful. He had spent months planning this. He had frozen her bank accounts. He had spread rumors about her to their friends. He had made sure she would be isolated, alone and helpless. He wanted her to suffer. He wanted her to know that defying him was the biggest mistake of her life. "My lord," Emeka pressed, sensing the opportunity. "I move to strike her request for a delay. Let us end this matter now." Justice Okoro sighed. He reached for his gavel. "Mrs. Okafor, I am sorry. We cannot continue to delay proceedings. We will have to proceed with—" Bang! The doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The sound was like thunder, like an explosion. Every head in the courtroom turned. Victor spun around in his chair, annoyed at the interruption. Emeka Nwosu looked up from his papers, his pen frozen in mid-air. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the ceiling fans seemed to stop spinning. Standing in the doorway was not some local lawyer in a worn-out wig and gown. Standing there was a woman who looked to be in her late 60s, but she stood as straight as a flagpole. She wore a brilliant white suit that looked like it cost more than Victor's car. Her silver hair was cut into a sharp, precise style that screamed money and power. She wore dark designer sunglasses, which she slowly removed, revealing eyes that were cold and sharp as broken glass. Behind her walked 3 younger lawyers, all carrying expensive leather briefcases, moving in perfect formation like soldiers following a general into battle. The woman didn't hurry. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the tiled floor. Each step sounded like a countdown, like time running out. Emeka Nwosu dropped his pen. His mouth fell open slightly. His face, usually so confident and arrogant, turned pale. Actually pale. "No," Emeka whispered, genuine fear creeping into his voice. "That's not possible." "Who is that?" Victor asked, confused by his lawyer's reaction. "Is that her mother? Joy's mother died when she was young. She told me she was an orphan." The woman reached the defense table. She didn't look at Joy. She didn't look at Justice Okoro. She turned slowly and looked directly at Victor Okafor. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile a python gives before it squeezes. "Apologies for my late arrival, my lord," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and filled every corner of the room without her even raising it. "I was delayed filing several motions at the Federal High Court in Abuja regarding Mr. Okafor's financial statements. It took longer than expected to document all his hidden accounts in Dubai and the Cayman Islands." Victor's blood ran cold. Justice Okoro leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Counsel, state your name for the record." The woman placed a gold-embossed business card on the court reporter's desk. She turned to face the judge. "Helen Adekunle," she said clearly, "senior managing partner at Adekunle, Williams & Partners, with offices in Abuja, Lagos and London. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant, Mrs. Joy Okafor." She paused, letting the weight of her name sink in. Then she looked at Victor again. "And," she added, her voice dropping lower, "I am also her mother." The silence that followed was absolute, total. It was the kind of silence that falls after a bomb goes off. Victor Okafor's brain struggled to process what he had just heard. "Mother?" he stammered, looking from the imposing woman in white to his trembling wife. "Joy, you said your mother was... You said she left you? You said she was gone." Joy finally looked up. Her eyes were wet with tears, but her chin was raised high. "I said she was gone from my life, Victor. I didn't say she was dead. We were estranged. Until yesterday." "Estranged," Helen Adekunle repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a death sentence. She moved around the defense table, taking the chair beside her daughter. She didn't hug Joy. Not yet. This was business. She placed a heavy briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 sharp clicks. "Joy left home 25 years ago because she wanted to escape my world," Helen explained, her voice calm but filled with power. "She wanted a simple life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not because her mother built the law firm that handles cases for half the oil companies in Nigeria." Helen turned her razor-sharp gaze to Emeka Nwosu. The opposing lawyer looked like he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. "Hello, Emeka," Helen said pleasantly. I haven't seen you since the Petroleum Ministry contract dispute in 2018. You were barely a junior associate then, weren't you? Carrying files for the real lawyers. Emeka Nwosu cleared his throat. His face flushed a deep red. Mrs. Adekunle, it is an honor. I was not aware you were admitted to practice in Rivers State. I am admitted to the bar in Rivers State, Lagos State, Abuja, and I have appeared before the West African Court of Justice, she replied, not breaking eye contact. I normally handle constitutional matters and international corporate law, multi-billion naira cases. But when my daughter called me crying yesterday, telling me that some middle-level oil company executive with more ego than sense was trying to destroy her, Helen paused deliberately. I decided to make an exception. Objection, Victor yelled, jumping to his feet. Panic was beginning to set in. Real panic. Personal attack. Who does this woman think she is? Sit down, Mr. Okafor, Justice Okoro barked. But now the judge's tone had changed. There was respect in his voice when he turned to Helen. Everyone in the Nigerian legal community knew the name Helen Adekunle. She was a legend. She was called the Iron Queen. She had argued cases at the Supreme Court in Abuja and had never lost a constitutional challenge. She was not just a lawyer, she was a force of nature. Mrs. Adekunle, Justice Okoro said, his tone now much more respectful, while your reputation certainly precedes you, we are in the middle of a hearing regarding asset division. Barrister Nwosu has filed a motion for immediate judgment based on the defendant's failure to secure representation. Yes, I saw that motion, Helen said, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase. It was creative, poorly researched, but creative. She stood up and walked toward the bench, handing a massive stack of documents to Officer Chukwu to give to the judge. She dropped a duplicate stack onto Emeka Nwosu's desk with a heavy thud that made him jump. Barrister Nwosu claims my client has no assets and no legal standing. That is now irrelevant. Furthermore, Mr. Okafor claims that the properties in question, the house in Old Gra'o, the apartment in Lekki, and the investment portfolios with several banks, are his sole property, protected by a prenuptial agreement signed 6 years ago. That prenup is binding, Victor shouted. She gets nothing. She signed it willingly. Helen turned to Victor. She removed her glasses slowly. Mr. Okafor, do you know who drafted the legal framework for identifying coercion in prenuptial agreements that was adopted by the Nigerian Law Reform Commission? Victor blinked. What? I did, Helen said softly. In 2003, I wrote the guidelines that define exactly what constitutes coercion in marital contracts. She tapped the documents on Emeka's table. And according to the sworn affidavit my daughter gave me yesterday evening, complete with her phone records, you threatened to send men to burn down her grandmother's house and harm her younger sister if she didn't sign that prenuptial agreement the night before your wedding. The courtroom gasped. Actual gasps from the people in the public gallery. That's a lie, Victor screamed. His face was turning purple. She's lying. She's a desperate liar. We have the text messages from that night, Helen continued calmly, her voice cutting through Victor's shouting like a machete through grass. Recovered from the backup server of your phone that you thought you had wiped clean. Exhibit C, my lord. Justice Okoro flipped through the documents to Exhibit C. His eyebrows shot up, his lips pressed into a thin line. Emeka Nwosu was frantically flipping through the pages, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. His hands were actually shaking. My lord, Emeka stammered, we haven't had adequate time to review this evidence. This is an ambush. This violates procedure. An ambush. Helen laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes your blood run cold. Barrister Nwosu, you tried to rush through a judgment against a woman with no legal counsel while your client sat there and mocked her to her face. You don't get to talk to me about procedural fairness. Now let's discuss the real issue here. The money. Helen turned to face the courtroom, addressing everyone like she was giving a lecture at a law school. Mr. Okafor claims his net worth is approximately 35 million naira, a decent amount for a man of his limited achievements. Victor looked like he was about to explode. However, Helen said, pulling out a second, even thicker folder, My team of forensic accountants, specialists who normally trace money for the EFCC, spent the last 18 hours following the paper trail of shell companies Mr. Okafor has been using. Companies registered in Dubai, South Africa, and the Cayman Islands. She dropped the second folder on the table. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom. It appears, my lord, that Mr. Okafor has been siphoning marital assets into a company called Summit Holdings for the past 4 years. The total amount hidden is not 35 million naira. Helen leaned forward, her face now inches from Victor's. It's 98 million naira. And since Mr. Okafor failed to disclose any of these funds on his financial affidavit filed under oath just 3 days ago, that constitutes perjury and financial fraud. Victor slumped back in his chair. He looked at Emeka. His voice was a desperate whisper. Do something. Object. Say something. Emeka Nwosu looked at the documents spread in front of him. He looked at Justice Okoro, who was now glaring at Victor with undisguised disgust. Then he looked at Helen Adekunle, who was calmly checking her manicured nails like she was waiting for a bus. I need a recess, my lord, Emeka said weakly. Request denied, Justice, Okoro said immediately. The judge's voice was hard as iron. I want to hear more about these foreign accounts. Mrs. Adekunle, please continue. Helen smoothed her suit jacket. Thank you, my lord. But before we delve deeper into Mr. Okafor's fraud, I would like to address something else. I want to address the way my client was humiliated in this courtroom. She walked back to Joy and placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. For the first time, Joy looked up at her mother and smiled. A real smile. Hope spreading across her face like sunrise. Victor, Helen said, her voice now dropping to a conversational tone that somehow sounded even more dangerous. You mocked my daughter because you thought she was weak. You thought that because she is kind and gentle, she must be defenseless. You confused her mercy with cowardice. Helen turned to face the court reporter. Let the record show, she stated clearly, that Mrs. Joy Okafor is now represented by Helen Adekunle of Adekunle, Williams and Partners. And I am not here to negotiate, Barrister Nwosu. She looked directly at Victor, her eyes burning with cold fire. I am here to take everything. The houses, the cars, every hidden naira, his reputation, his dignity. I am going to dismantle your life piece by piece until you are left with exactly what you tried to leave my daughter with. Nothing but shame. Barrister Nwosu, Helen said, gesturing toward the witness area. Your client may take the stand now. I have questions for him. The atmosphere in the courtroom had completely changed. The air crackled with tension. The handful of people in the public gallery, mostly court clerks and a few lawyers waiting for other cases, were now sitting forward, paying full attention. They could sense history being made. One law clerk was actually recording on her phone, though she was trying to be discreet about it. Justice Okoro rubbed his temples. He looked like a man who suddenly realized his routine divorce case had just turned into something much, much bigger. Barrister Nwosu, Justice Okoro said, does your client wish to testify? Victor looked at Emeka desperately. Do I have to answer her questions? You're the plaintiff, Emeka hissed back, his voice harsh. He was no longer trying to be supportive. He was trying to save himself. You filed this suit. You have to take the stand. And for God's sake, Victor, do not lie. That woman knows everything. She has documented everything. Victor stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. His expensive suit suddenly felt heavy, uncomfortable. He walked to the witness stand, and Officer Chukwu made him place his hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. Victor sat down. He looked out at the courtroom, trying to regain some of his earlier confidence. He was Victor Okafor. He was a senior manager at a major oil servicing company. He had graduated from the University of Lagos. He had built businesses. This old woman was just trying to intimidate him. Helen walked to the front of the courtroom. She didn't bring any notes. She just stood there, hands resting lightly on the wooden railing, and looked at Victor like a scientist examining an insect under a microscope. Mr. Okafor, she began, her voice deceptively pleasant. Let's start with something simple. Earlier today, you mentioned that my daughter was late because of traffic. Is that correct? Victor scoffed nervously. It was just a comment. She's always late. She's disorganized. She can't manage time. Disorganized, Helen repeated slowly. Is that why you took control of all the finances in your marriage? Because Joy was too disorganized to handle money? Yes, Victor said, gaining a bit of confidence. Joy is a dreamer. She does her little fabric business. She goes to church. She doesn't understand things like investments or portfolio management. I handled everything to protect our future. To protect your future, Helen nodded. I see. Is that why you purchased an apartment in Lekki Phase 1 on March 20th of this year? The one registered under Summit Holdings? Victor's confidence faltered. That was an investment, a rental property. Interesting, Helen said. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her jacket pocket and unfolded it carefully. Because according to credit card statements linked to that property, statements that your secretary, poor Mary, forgot to delete from the company server, you purchased furniture for the apartment. Specifically, a king-size bed, a dining set, and new kitchen appliances. Rather expensive furnishings for a rental property, wouldn't you say? Joy's hand flew to her mouth. She gasped softly. Victor went pale. It was to increase the rental value. Good furniture attracts better tenants. Of course, Helen said. She was smiling again, but it was a predator's smile. And the gold necklace you purchased from that jewelry store in Ikeja 3 days after buying the furniture? The one that cost 450,000 naira? Was that also to attract tenants? Or was that for the woman living in the apartment? Objection, my lord. Emeka Nwosu jumped to his feet, though he looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Relevance. Issues of infidelity do not affect asset division under Nigerian law. They do when marital funds were used to support the affair, Justice Okoro ruled, his eyes now cold steel focused on Victor. Objection overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Okafor. Victor gripped the railing of the witness box. His palms were sweating. I don't know what she's talking about. Helen's smile widened. You don't? Very well. Let's leave your girlfriend Blessing aside for now. We'll come back to her later. Victor flinched when she said the name. Actually flinched like she had slapped him. Let's talk about your company, Summit Holdings, Helen continued, her voice never losing its calm, measured tone. You stated in your sworn affidavit that your income last year was 8 million naira, correct? Yes, Victor said quickly. Business was difficult. The economy was bad. The economy was bad, Helen repeated mockingly. She turned to Justice Okoro. My lord, I have here bank statements from a financial institution in Dubai. They show a wire transfer of 12 million naira entering an account controlled by Summit Holdings on the exact same day Mr. Okafor claims the economy was bad. She held up the document. Mr. Okafor, can you tell this court what you did with that 12 million naira? Victor said nothing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Allow me to help you, Helen said. You converted that money into cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, to be specific. You stored it on a digital wallet that you keep in a safety deposit box at First Bank, Rumola branch, box number 237. Victor's jaw actually dropped open. His eyes went wide. How did you... I'm Helen Adekunle, she said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Finding hidden money is what I do, Mr. Okafor. It's what I've done for 25 years. Now here is your problem. You did not declare that 12 million naira. You did not declare the cryptocurrency. You certainly did not share any of it with your wife. Helen stepped closer to the witness stand. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. You stood here this morning and you mocked my daughter. You laughed at her. You said she had no lawyer because she was poor and foolish. You said she couldn't manage money. But the truth, Mr. Okafor, is that you are the fool. You are the one who stole 12 million naira from your marriage, hid it in a bank vault, and then paraded your girlfriend around Lagos shopping malls while my daughter used her last 5,000 naira to buy gari and soup. I didn't steal anything, Victor shouted, his composure completely shattered now. It's my money. I earned it. She sat at home sewing useless clothes. She didn't contribute to building anything. Why should she get half of everything I worked for? The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the ceiling fans seemed to stop. Justice Okoro stared at Victor with a look of pure contempt. "Mr. Okafor," the judge said slowly, "did you just admit, on the record and under oath, that you intentionally concealed marital assets to prevent your wife from receiving her legal share?" Victor looked at the judge, then he looked at Emeka Nwosu. Emeka had his head in his hands, his shoulders were shaking. Victor stammered. "No, I didn't mean—" "No further questions for this witness," Helen said, turning her back on Victor with a flourish. She walked back to the defense table and sat down beside Joy. Joy was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore, they were tears of relief. Helen reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. "It's finished," Helen whispered. "He destroyed himself." Emeka Nwosu was a survivor. He had built his career by knowing when to fight and when to retreat. He had spent 20 years in divorce law, navigating the dangerous waters of wealthy clients and bitter disputes. He knew the most important rule: never go down with a sinking ship. As Victor stumbled down from the witness stand, looking like a man who had just been beaten in a street fight, Emeka was already calculating his next move. Victor had just committed perjury in open court. The judge was furious, and sitting across the aisle was Helen Adekunle, a legal powerhouse who could not only destroy Victor but could also file complaints that would end Emeka's career. "Emeka," Victor hissed as he collapsed into his chair, his expensive suit now wrinkled and damp with sweat. "Fix this. Object to something. Say that evidence was obtained illegally. Do something." Emeka didn't look at his client. He began packing his briefcase. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, panic rising in his voice like floodwater. Emeka stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "My lord," Emeka said, his voice steady despite the disaster unfolding around him, "at this time I must respectfully move to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff." Victor's eyes went wide. "What? You can't abandon me. I paid you 3 million naira." "Mr. Okafor," Justice Okoro said, his voice dangerous, "we are in the middle of a hearing. Barrister Nwosu, this is highly irregular." "My lord," Emeka continued carefully, choosing every word like he was walking through a minefield, "a serious ethical issue has arisen that makes it impossible for me to continue representing this client in good conscience. As an officer of this court, I cannot be party to perjury. Based on what my client has just testified," he paused, "my continued representation would violate my professional duties." Translation: he lied under oath. "I didn't know about it, and I'm not going to lose my license because of him." "You traitor!" Victor screamed. He jumped up and grabbed Emeka by the front of his jacket. "You work for me. I pay you. You're supposed to defend me." "Officer Chukwu." Justice Okoro's voice cracked like a whip. Officer Chukwu moved fast for a big man. He grabbed Victor by both arms and physically lifted him away from Emeka, slamming him back into his chair. "Sit down and be quiet, or I will lock you in a cell until this hearing is finished," Officer Chukwu growled, his face close to Victor's. Victor sat. He was breathing hard. His tie was pulled loose. He looked around the courtroom. He was completely alone now. Even his own lawyer had turned his back on him. Justice Okoro glared at Emeka. "Barrister Nwosu, I am not granting your withdrawal at this moment. You will sit in that chair and you will ensure your client's rights are protected until this hearing concludes. After that, you may file whatever motions you wish. But right now, you are not leaving this courtroom. Do you understand?" Emeka's face fell. But he nodded. "Yes, my lord." He sat back down, deliberately moving his chair several feet away from Victor. Helen Adekunle watched this entire display with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary about animals fighting. She stood up again, smoothing her white jacket. "My lord," she said, "since Mr. Okafor's counsel is still present, though clearly reluctant, I would like to call my next witness. This witness is relevant to Mr. Okafor's character and his petition for financial support from my client, which I must note he had the audacity to file." Justice Okoro looked exhausted. "Call your witness." "I call Miss Blessing Okonkwo," Helen announced. Victor's head snapped up. His face went white. "No," he whispered. "She wouldn't do this to me." The courtroom doors opened again. A young woman walked in. She was beautiful, wearing a simple navy dress and flat shoes. She looked scared. Her hands were shaking. She walked past Victor without looking at him. Victor reached out a hand. "Blessing, baby, please don't." She jerked away from him like he was a snake. Blessing took the witness stand. Officer Chukwu swore her in. Her voice was so quiet when she agreed to tell the truth that the court reporter had to ask her to speak up. "Miss Okonkwo," Helen said gently. There was real kindness in her voice now. "Thank you for having the courage to come here today. I know this is very difficult. Can you please tell the court what your relationship to Mr. Okafor was?" Blessing took a deep breath. I was his girlfriend. For 2 years. "Was?" Helen asked. "Yes, Ma," Blessing said. Her voice was getting stronger. Anger was giving her courage. "I broke up with him yesterday evening." "Why did you break up with him, Miss Okonkwo?" Blessing looked directly at Victor. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also with fury. "Because," she said, her voice shaking, "because Mrs. Adekunle showed me the phone records, the messages Victor sent to another woman in Abuja. Another girlfriend." The courtroom erupted. People in the public gallery were whispering loudly. One woman gasped so loud it echoed. "Order!" Justice Okoro banged his gavel hard. "I will have silence." Victor looked like he was going to vomit. His face had gone from white to green. "Miss Okonkwo," Helen continued, completely unfazed by the noise, "did Mr. Okafor ever discuss his wife with you?" "All the time, Ma," Blessing said. The words came faster now, like water breaking through a dam. "He told me his wife was useless. He said she was a burden who didn't understand anything about business. He said he was going to destroy her in court. He was proud of it, Ma. He bragged about it to his friends." Blessing's voice was rising now, the anger fully flowing. "He said he was going to leave her with nothing. Not because he needed to, Ma, but because he wanted to. He said it would be fun. He called it teaching her a lesson. He wanted to make her suffer so she would come back to him begging." Joy covered her face with her hands. Her whole body was shaking with sobs. Helen put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "He told me," Blessing continued, tears now running down her own face, "that he had hired a lawyer who was a killer. That's what he called Barrister Nwosu. A killer. He said his wife was too stupid and too poor to fight back. He said he was going to make sure she ended up in a one-room apartment in Eliozu with nothing. He said," her voice cracked, "he said he wanted to own her, like a slave." The words hung in the air like poison gas. They were ugly, cruel, and they were the final nail in Victor Okafor's coffin. Helen let the silence stretch. Let the weight of Blessing's testimony settle on everyone in the room. "Thank you, Miss Okonkwo," Helen said softly. "I know that was difficult. No further questions." She turned to Emeka. "Nwosu, would you like to cross-examine?" Emeka looked at Victor, who was staring at the table, completely defeated. Emeka looked at the judge. "No questions, my lord," he said quietly. Justice Okoro removed his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a white cloth from his pocket. He didn't look at the documents in front of him. He looked at Victor Okafor. "Mr. Okafor," Justice Okoro began, his voice low and dangerous. "In 23 years on the bench, I have seen many ugly divorces. I have seen people fight over cooking pots. I have seen people try to take children away out of spite. But I must tell you, what I have witnessed here today is among the most disgusting displays of arrogance, cruelty, and deception I have ever seen." Victor didn't look up. "You came into my court," Justice Okoro continued, his voice rising like thunder, "and you mocked the judicial process. You mocked a woman you promised to love and protect. You committed perjury. You committed fraud. You hid millions of naira. You used marital funds to support not one, but multiple affairs. And you sat there laughing at your wife, thinking you had won." The judge turned to Joy. His face softened slightly. "Mrs. Okafor, I owe you an apology. This court should have protected you sooner. I should have seen what was happening." Joy nodded through her tears. Helen squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "However," Justice Okoro said, putting his glasses back on with deliberate slowness, "I am now in a position to make things right." He picked up his pen. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ceiling fans again. I am issuing a temporary order immediately. The final judgment will follow once Mrs. Adekunle's forensic accountants complete a full audit of all of Mr. Okafor's assets, both in Nigeria and abroad. Every single naira. First, the judge said, his voice now formal and precise, I am freezing all bank accounts, investments, and assets belonging to Victor Okafor, Summit Holdings, or any other entity he controls or has interest in. Sole access is granted to Mrs. Joy Okafor and her legal counsel. Victor groaned out loud. Second, I am awarding Mrs. Okafor immediate and exclusive right to occupy the marital home in Old GRA. Mr. Okafor, you have until 6 o'clock this evening to vacate the premises. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Nothing else. If you remove so much as a teaspoon or a picture frame, I will have you arrested for theft. Third, Justice Okoro said, now looking at Emeka Nwosu, I am referring a complete transcript of today's proceedings to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission for investigation into perjury, fraud, and money laundering. Barrister Nwosu, I strongly suggest you cooperate fully if you wish to continue practicing law in this state. Yes, my lord, Emeka said immediately, his voice small. Fourth and finally, Justice Okoro said, looking at Helen, Mrs. Adekunle, regarding your legal fees. Helen smiled. Yes, my lord. Mr. Okafor will be personally responsible for 100% of Mrs. Okafor's legal fees and costs. Given your firm's standard rates for senior partners, the judge paused. I imagine that will be quite substantial. Very substantial, my lord, Helen agreed, her smile widening. Court is adjourned, Justice Okoro declared. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded like a door slamming shut on Victor's old life. As people began to move and talk, Victor just sat there, frozen. His world had ended. In less than 3 hours, he had gone from thinking he would walk out a free man to facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and public humiliation. He had no home, no money, no lawyer who would touch him. Nothing. He slowly stood up, his legs shaking. He looked over at Helen and Joy, who were packing their briefcases. Joy looked completely different now. She stood taller. Her shoulders were back. The crushing weight that had been pressing her down was gone. Victor walked over to them. His voice came out as a croak. Joy, Joy, please, you can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Joy looked at him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She just looked finished. Like she was looking at a stranger. Before she could speak, Helen stepped between them. She was several inches shorter than Victor, but somehow she seemed to tower over him. Her presence was like a wall of steel. Mr. Okafor, Helen said, her voice like ice, my daughter does not speak to criminals. If you have anything to say, you may direct it to my junior associate. She gestured to one of the young lawyers behind her, a sharp-looking young man in his 30s. Daniel, Helen said, give Mr. Okafor your business card. Daniel handed Victor a card. Now, Helen said, taking Joy's arm, get out of our way. We have a celebratory lunch reservation at Genesis Restaurant. I believe my daughter has a lot of catching up to do. They walked past Victor. Joy didn't look back, not even once. Victor stood there, watching the heavy wooden doors close behind them. He felt Emeka brush past him without a word, already on his phone, probably calling his own lawyer. Victor Okafor was alone, completely alone. But the story wasn't over. Not quite yet. As Helen and Joy walked down the courthouse steps into the hot Port Harcourt afternoon, blinking in the bright sunlight, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. But it wasn't Helen's car. The window rolled down. An older man sat in the back seat. He had grey hair and a hard face, the face of a man who had spent his life making difficult business decisions. He looked at Helen, then at Joy. Joy stopped walking. Her hand flew to her mouth. Daddy, she whispered. Helen's entire body went rigid. She gripped her briefcase tighter. Hello, Helen, the man said. His voice was deep and commanding, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. I heard about the hearing. The Iron Queen returns to court. You made quite a scene in there. I did what was necessary, Samuel, Helen said sharply. I protected our daughter. I know, Samuel said. He turned his gaze to Joy. Joy, It's been a very long time. Joy looked between her mother and the father she hadn't seen in more than 20 years. The father who had told her she was making a mistake leaving Lagos. The father who had said Victor was a good match because he worked in oil and gas. The father who had sided with Victor during the early years of the marriage because business connections matter. "What are you doing here?" Joy asked, her voice small and hurt. Samuel opened the car door and stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of a wealthy man. But he wasn't there to apologize. "I'm here," Samuel said, pulling a document from his jacket pocket, "because Victor Okafor owes me money. A great deal of money, and I heard that you two just seized all his assets." He stepped closer. He wasn't trying to hug his daughter, he was there for business. Helen stepped in front of Joy. "She owes you nothing, Samuel. Whatever Victor owes you is Victor's problem, not hers." "Not according to this," Samuel said, unfolding the document. "Victor borrowed 15 million naira from my investment company, Fortress Investment Group, 7 months ago. He used the house in Old GRA as collateral. The loan is in default as of yesterday. That means the house now belongs to my company." Joy felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. She had just won the house back in court, only to have her own father take it away on the courthouse steps. Helen snatched the document from Samuel's hand. Her eyes moved across the page with incredible speed, like a machine scanning data. "You loaned him money against our daughter's home?" Helen asked, her voice full of disbelief. "You knew he was hiding assets. You knew he was treating her badly, and you still loaned him money." "Business is business, Helen," Samuel said with a shrug. "I didn't know all the details. Victor came to me with a proposal. He needed cash for an expansion. I provided it. Now he can't pay. That's how loans work." He looked at Joy, and for the first time, there was a flash of something that might have been guilt. "I'm sorry, my dear, but that house is collateral on a legal loan. You'll need to find somewhere else to live." Joy felt tears coming again. She had fought so hard, she had won in court, and now her own father was taking it all away. Helen looked at the document. Then she looked at Samuel. A slow smile spread across her face, the same dangerous smile she had given Victor before destroying him. "Oh, Samuel," Helen said, her voice filled with dark amusement, "you really should have done proper due diligence before accepting this collateral." Samuel frowned. "What are you talking about? I had my lawyers check. Victor's name is on the deed." "His name is on the property deed, yes," Helen said, "but did your lawyers check the ownership structure?" She reached into her own briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. "In 2019, when Joy was pregnant with the child she later miscarried, I convinced Victor to transfer the property into a family asset trust. It was for tax purposes. Victor agreed because he's greedy and hates paying taxes." Helen opened the folder and showed it to Samuel. But what Victor didn't read carefully in the trust documents was Section 8, Paragraph 3. It states clearly that any use of trust property as collateral requires the written consent of all trust beneficiaries. That means both Victor and Joy had to sign. She pulled out another page. "Joy never signed this loan agreement, did she?" Samuel looked at the signature page of his loan document. There was a signature that said Joy Okafor, but the handwriting was shaky, uneven. Nothing like Joy's actual signature, which Helen now placed beside it for comparison. "He forged it," Joy said quietly, realizing yet another layer of Victor's betrayal. "He forged my signature again." Samuel's face went pale. "If the signature is forged, then your loan agreement is void," Helen finished. "The collateral was never validly pledged. You have no claim on the house." Samuel looked at the papers in his hands like they had turned into snakes. "That means I'm out 15 million naira with no collateral," he said slowly. "Correct," Helen said cheerfully, "and if you try to enforce this void contract against my daughter, I will sue Fortress Investment Group for attempting to collect on a fraudulent loan. I will tie your company up in litigation for so long that you'll be 70 before it's resolved. And I will make sure every newspaper in Nigeria knows that you tried to make your own daughter homeless." She stepped closer to Samuel, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he and Joy could hear. "Or you could do the right thing for once in your life, Samuel. You could walk away from this loan, take your loss like a man, and let your daughter keep the home that she legally won in court today." Samuel looked at Helen, then he looked at Joy. He saw the woman his daughter had become. Strong, resilient. Nothing like the scared young girl who had left Lagos 25 years ago. He saw the strength in her face, strength she had inherited from her mother, not from him. "What do you want from me?" Samuel asked. "Walk away from the loan," Helen said. "Go after Victor personally if you want. Sue him, have him arrested, I don't care. But leave the house with Joy and—" She paused. "Apologize to your daughter for the last 25 years. Samuel was a proud man. He had built a successful investment company. He was used to winning. But he was also smart enough to know when he had been outmaneuvered. He sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to deflate him. He turned to Joy. "Joy," he said, his voice rough and uncomfortable, I didn't know about the forgery. I should never have loaned Victor money without talking to you first. I should have been a better father.